This is Interstates. I'm Alex Chambers. If you know The Onion, you know their articles about local man or area man. The articles are usually making fun of some aspect of mediocre men, like this one, based in Indianapolis. Area man accepts burden of being only person on Earth who understands how world actually works. But from the beginning, the local man stories were also poking fun at this staple of local news. Stories that didn't have a lot of actual news value about something some local person was experiencing. The joke was about how these small towns didn't have much going on, so they'd do these filler stories to, fill the pages. But they didn't tell you anything useful. They're mostly gone now. The Onion still does area man stories, but the newspapers that would put the sincere reports about local people into print, the majority of them have either folded completely or they've been bought by private equity companies and merged with other local papers. They're run out of central offices with a skeleton crew of reporters, so even if they do appear in print, they're reprinting regional stories instead of actual local ones. This is a problem. It's a problem for democracy. Researchers found that after private equity takes over local papers, voter turnout drops. People are more likely to vote straight ticket for the party they like instead of voting based on local issues. Political polarization goes up, there's more corruption in government and business, and people trust the media less overall. We also lose those area man stories. And not just the mediocre men, but the high schooler who shot the three-pointer that won the local rivalry, or the fifth graders who did that mural downtown, or the great-great-grandmother of 7 who died recently. Maxine Terrell was quite the artist, and a loud and proud Trump supporter, according to her obituary. It's democracy, and it's also a sense of the people around you, including the ones not exactly like you, like the ones the algorithm supplies you. It's not looking good for local news these days. For democracy either, to be honest. But it's not all doom and gloom. Martinsville, Indiana, population 11,000, has a new paper in town. It's a print newspaper, the Morgan County Correspondent. It started in August 2023, and it's doing pretty well. Stephen Crane is the founding editor and publisher and reporter. I went up to the correspondent's offices a couple weeks ago to talk with him. We talked about what happened to the newspapers in Morgan County, where Martinsville is the county seat. Martinsville had a newspaper, and so did Mooresville in the north of the county. They still do, in theory at least. Today's headline in the Reporter-Times, which was Martinsville's city paper, is about the Princess Theater building's new owner. The Princess Theater is in Bloomington. It looks like most of the other articles are also about Bloomington. Stephen also told me how he got into journalism. He says he had some authority issues when he was younger, and his decision to start a paper 2 years ago is not unconnected. We talked about the differences between locally owned papers and corporate owned, the experience of reading a print paper versus online, and why he doesn't care that much about attracting readers under 40. Stay with us. Did you grow up with a strong civic sense in your family?
Family, yes. Personally, absolutely not. Dad ran for Congress 3 times, was defeated 3 times. Ultimately saw that as a blessing. Amid 2020 hindsight, realizing he needed to be home for his 4 boys in 5 years, less than 5 years actually. And so the fact that he could be present for that ultimately was a blessing in disguise, despite the heartbreak of defeat. So sure. With that, they were very much civic-minded.
Yeah, he was running for state Congress or federal?
U.S. Congress, okay. Correct, yep. Okay. And so that was sort of the nature of it. Of course, my grandfather also being a syndicated columnist, very much out there in the world, lecturing all over the country, and very, certainly in his time, was very much of a prominent figure, coast to coast, given who he was and what he brought to the table, and a very different era. But certainly that was part of the sort of generational pedigree. I don't know if it's because I'm the youngest or not, but often finding the beat of my own drum, as the 3 older brothers did. I went the other direction, just on principle. And so...
They did more traditional kinds of routes?
Well, like they were all in, let's say, Boy Scouts. So 2 of my brothers were Eagle Scouts, and I wanted no part of it. So I went on one trip to Canada where we did a 50-mile canoe trip for a week. Lovely, but that was the extent of my Scout experience. They were all in, like, drama and choirs, and wanted no part of that. So just by nature of it, a lot of things that they pursued I did not.
What did you do instead?
Probably being, if we go back to it, of course, I was the kid who was going to the principal's office like every year and going to high school. I was out there enjoying the extracurricular activities.
We do have a microphone, I guess.
Yes, of course. So I'm choosing my words carefully. Breaking laws and things, we'll say. I think the statute of limitations has run out, so we're all right. But with that, yeah, very much doing my own thing. Ultimately, I did go to 1 year of school down at Hanover, and then I took a 2-year break and was a snowboard bum out in Colorado, which I highly recommend to anybody who has nothing better to do. Get out there and enjoy the beauty of God's creation. But then I knew very quickly it's one of those where you realize what you don't want to do for the rest of your life.
So he went to college. He went to Calvin College. It's now Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
What had me choose Calvin is because it was a Christian school where I could smoke cigarettes on campus. Believe it or not, that is a rarity. So that
you got your priorities straight. I'm glad to hear that.
I totally do, yeah. And of course, a good academic institution, blah, blah, blah. That's all fine, but I can smoke cigarettes on campus. This is what matters, people. But it really spoke to their approach, which was because my brothers at the school that they attended, they had to sign an honor code. I won't do this. I won't do that. And it's like, no, free will's a thing, and it's a thing for a reason. So don't force my hand. Give me the freedom to choose. So their unofficial motto was like responsible freedom. We give you the freedom. We want you to be responsible with it, but hey, it's your life. Make your decisions. Yeah. And so I fully appreciated that approach that they had, which is in contrast to many, many other Christian institutions, particularly when it comes to higher education.
He graduated, then taught English for a while in the Mariana Islands in South Korea.
So I call it, between Colorado and Asia, my constructive stalling, as I'm putting off the real world decisions that might determine the trajectory. When the time came for me to ultimately go back, I looked actually in keeping in Dad's footsteps at med school, but realized it was going to be 2 years straight of science classes before I could even apply. That was quickly out the door. And I still don't remember why, but I stumbled on journalism. I had gotten feedback from professors, oh, you can really write, and didn't think anything of it other than the grade. But then I really started looking at the tenets of journalism, and that truly resonated with who I am, starting with, of course, my authority issues. So government watchdog reporting, let's go. But you also have looking out for the underdog, and sort of, they're all cliches, but they're cliches for a reason because they're the truth.
He got a master's degree at the IU School of Journalism in 2007 at Ernie Pyle Hall, named after the great war reporter. And Stephen's next step was probably the fault of Ernie Pyle's ghost, although the fact that his parents had both been in the military might have had something to do with it too. Instead of heading into the trenches of municipal meetings to stitch democracy together one local story at a time, Stephen joined the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, which meant, among other things, boot camp.
So it's a 10-week program down at Quantico, Virginia. So January of '08, I was in Quantico running 4 miles with a ruck pack and all the ridiculousness that goes with it. And so amid the 10-week program, that was the difference between the Marines and everybody else. You can graduate from OCS and still say thanks but no thanks, right? Which is that the few, the proud. They don't want you there unless you want to be there. Everybody else, you sign the dotted line, guess what? You're locked in for 4 years. Yeah. So I fully appreciated that approach as well. Mm-hmm. And so, long story short, I got kicked out at the end of the 9th week.
Okay.
I mean,
end of the 9th week.
Yeah, so I had made everything. I had done the entire training regimen. Because that last week is really out processing and administrative stuff, and you do a few honor runs, but by and large, you're done. And so I had completed pretty much the whole thing. But
how did you get kicked out?
So the official paperwork is a failure to adapt to military lifestyle due to a continued trend of laziness and belligerence. That's it.
This is definitely a theme. Not the laziness necessarily, I feel like, but you keep mentioning authority.
Yes. Well, and of course, military, they have their own definitions of these things. So sure. The whole laziness was like, oh, you only did 10 pull-ups. You were supposed to do 12, you lazy bastard. And even the belligerence was really because fantastic, unbelievable experience. They're assessing, it's all leadership training, right? They want officers, they want them to have the know-how and the leadership capabilities. And so they're assessing you at every turn. Every turn they're assessing, giving you written assessments. My problem is they also give you a space to give your rebuttal or your response. And so that's what really...
Did they consider it a response or a rebuttal?
Absolute response. I should...
You said rebuttal.
Yeah, right. So the rebuttal is, total miswording, because they want the response, and they want the response to be yes, sir, no, excuse, sir. And so that was not always my response. And so if I concurred with their assessment, I would say as much. If I disagreed, I would say as much. And so I got my eardrums busted a few times from them taking offense at my response / rebuttal. Yeah. But the experience in general, I mean, it truly was. And of course, I mean, I came up with respect for the military. That was but a small taste of the larger sacrifices that those folks really go through and endure, most of them for years, as opposed to weeks. But even just getting that very small taste, it only increased my respect for those folks, because they are literally giving up even constitutional rights, right? Because you are signing yourself over to the U.S. government. But when you're talking about a regulation book that is regulating the length of my nose hairs, then that's a little too much. And frankly, I knew probably about 2 weeks in that probably not for me, but I still wanted to graduate that 10-week program, and that too did not come to fruition.
Was that a surprise?
Not necessarily, because there were some disciplinary actions taken throughout those 9 weeks. So I was told to hey, just act like you want to graduate. If you just sort of give them the line, yeah, I want to be here, I was unwilling to do that. And so a very unceremonious departure at the end of the 9th week. And I feel good. I still unofficially have the bragging right that I went through the most serious, the most rigorous basic training, probably, certainly in the U.S., if not the world, in terms of officer candidate schools. The Marines, I would argue, they're still the biggest and baddest on the block, for sure. And same applies to their OCS.
But, you wouldn't stop speaking truth to power.
Right, yes, no. Often to my detriment, clearly, yes. But that's okay. Duck feathers required, it rolls off the back. So when I got kicked out, then it was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go find a reporter gig. And so that's what I did. Having spent 2 years in the Rockies, literally every job I applied to, I would Google ski resort closest to, because I love snowboarding. That's one of the few skills that I have in life where I am expert level. And so I wound up in Wyoming. That was my first reporter job, tucked off in this, again, a community newspaper. I've always sought community newspapers, because I'm a country boy from Morgan County, Indiana, and you realize the role that those newspapers play in a community. It really is sort of the heart and soul, and really ties the community fabric. It really tightens those threads up, and really central to community identity. And so always sought community newspapers, and so that's where I found myself after my unceremonious departure from Marine Corps OCS, was working as a reporter out in Wyoming.
He traveled the world reporting on charity organizations, and then he worked at a couple other community newspapers in California and then Wyoming again. And then his dad got sick. He didn't have a lot of time left. At this point, Stephen was married with kids, and he brought his family back to Martinsville so he could be around for his dad's last years. That was in 2017. Turned out there was a job for him that would, in some unfortunate ways, eventually lead him to start a third newspaper in Morgan County. The two that already existed were the Martinsville Reporter-Times and the Mooresville Decatur-Times. They were both owned by Schurz Communications Incorporated, a family company that owned a bunch of other papers in Indiana and nearby states. Stephen got hired on as the managing editor of the two Morgan County papers.
So one at that time was coming out 6 days a week. The other was coming out twice a week. And so we were putting out 8 newspapers per week upon arrival.
It was a big shift. He'd been working at 2-day-a-week papers before that.
Timeliness is a thing, and so you're scramble mode more often than not, and making it happen, and it's a whole thing. You Google most stressful jobs, top 10. Guess what? Newspaper reporter or whatever is always generally top 5 actually, but always in the top 10 list, always.
Okay, I did Google most stressful jobs, and newspaper reporter isn't actually on the list. But that might not be because of a lack of stress, but a lack of the job itself. there just might not be enough newspaper reporters to be statistically significant anymore. But if you've got the job...
The stress is real because the press waits for no man. Right. Yeah, so you got to get that sucker done and hit your deadlines. I always took pride in hitting those deadlines.
And so I'm curious, did you feel like that was something with that stress, taking on that stress? Like, how long did you do it, and how long did you feel while you were in it like you would be able to keep doing it?
I mean, burnout's a very real thing,
yeah.
Especially as these companies continue to downsize. And so what is the natural result of that is doing more with less. And so every person that remains on this boat is having to do more to help keep that ship afloat. And so, yeah, no question, for many, many people, and you see it, burnout is a very real thing. And soon enough, they're finding a job with a normal work schedule and better pay and all the things that newspaper generally doesn't entail. So, yeah, it was one of those. Going back to that parental service was sometimes literally beat into us at times where, guess what? Life is service. Nothing else much matters. Relationships and service. Serve. The only question is, what is your sphere of influence? Newspaper, we are blessed and privileged to have a fairly larger sphere of influence, particularly in that community in which that newspaper is serving. And so getting to do these things, it really is an honor and privilege. And so that helps sustain the fuel tank. And even if you're running on fumes at times, the tank will get refilled just by nature of what you're doing, which is truly serving the community.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious if there was a shift in how it felt to be doing the work itself, either when you were working for SCI, the Schurz family, when they were owned it, versus then when it got sold to, was it Gateway, the bigger company?
Gatehouse. Yeah.
Gatehouse, okay.
Yes.
And so when did it happen? And tell me about just that shift.
Sure. So Schurz was preparing to sell us unbeknownst to us, right? And in preparation for that, they were wanting to get their numbers to start lining up better to make the deal look more appealing. And so we started losing people before they sold us. And so some of those took place before the sale. And so we were all like, wait, how are we going to do sports when we don't have a sports reporter? And so you're feeling that contraction taking place. Somewhat concerning, but it's also familiar territory, sadly, as layoffs and firings may be taking place and things are downsizing. Didn't think too much of it. Then once the sale was announced and it was like a oh shoot moment, what is this going to entail? So Gatehouse bought us. The traditional stable of publications for Gatehouse tended to be community newspapers, very small to medium, certainly not your sort of mid-major metros that you would find with Gannett. I think Gannett, and again, don't quote me, but I think they had probably 50 or 60 mid-majors. That was their wheelhouse, was these mid-majors.
And these are both companies that are buying up newspapers across the country. Okay, for clarification.
Right, but Gannett had been in financial straits. They had been in trouble, and they needed somebody to buy them to save them, is really what that amounted to. Gatehouse had the capital. I mean, it's all debt, but they certainly had their stable of publications. Their operations were going okay. So after they acquired us in, I believe, February 2019, very quickly they turned all their attention to the Gannett buyout. And so we were sort of left to our own devices and ignored because we weren't getting folded into the Gatehouse operations. In terms of even the processes, the programs, all of the things, the website programs even. And so we were sort of floating along, waiting for the Gannett deal to take place, which ultimately took place toward the end of 2019.
Gatehouse buying Gannett.
Correct. Okay. And so everybody likes to call it a merger. It was not a merger. No, Gatehouse came and saved Gannett's backside. And then, of course, Gannett has the brand. And so they took on the Gannett brand. And then the unofficial division is Legacy Gannett versus New Gannett or whatever. I frankly don't recall exactly what they look like, but some still prefer, I'm Legacy Gannett. Okay. I'm not sure if that's a badge of honor or not, but okay, sounds good. And so then once they took on Gannett, they put all the Gannett people in charge on editorial. On the editorial side, they got USA Today. Absolutely, that's a national publication. I get it. But Gannett, given their traditional stable of publications, had no idea what a community newspaper is. They could not comprehend the function at the local level, a very different function. We sort of half joke, community newspapers, it's the old refrigerator paper thing, where every edition, somebody's cutting something out and putting it on their fridge. So community news matters.
Because like say it's someone related to them or has some personal connection.
Right. And so even
like you're really helping the community see itself.
Absolutely. It really is anchoring identity in so many ways. And so you're trying to cover the full spectrum of that community, from the hard news to the features to the pseudo bulletin board of events of what's going on, the opinion page that you ideally are hearing letters from local folks about local issues, but you're getting the kindergarten art fair, and here's little Johnny or Janie who just got a blue ribbon, yay rah, we love this. Yes, this is it. This is the community. And you really are helping define and or anchor that identity for the community. So whether you're talking sports, whether you're talking little Johnny or Janie, please believe that's going on the fridge and ultimately a scrapbook to be pulled out their senior year of high school and show how far they've come. And so this is bread and butter, heart and soul stuff of a community newspaper that was not comprehended by those running the show at the editorial level. And then the grand irony, of course, is, oh, wait, y'all just ran yourselves into the ground financially, and yet now you're in charge of the new and improved with like 5 times as many papers? Sounds good. And
5 times as many papers meant a lot more editing. In March 2020, you might remember where you were in March 2020, management added Bloomington's Herald-Times newspaper to Stephen's editing plate. That meant that he was in charge of 16 newspaper editions per week. He waved a white flag, said it was impossible. And in 2021, they did bring on a new editor for Bloomington's Herald-Times. That got Stephen back to just 9 papers a week. But then, less than a month later, they decided they wanted him to take on another 6-day-a-week paper, bringing him back to 15. And that was when he gave his 2 weeks' notice.
And really turned all of my attention to local ownership on the heels of that.
Okay. So did you already at that point have an idea for some sort of locally owned?
Abso-freaking-lutely. Yeah. Because this was hell. And frankly, it's not the first time I'd experienced corporate-owned newspaper. Mm-hmm. And so under every scenario that I had that, it was less than ideal. In fact, so beyond less than ideal that the dream had always been, frankly, coming out, my first job in Wyoming, was like, man, if only locals could own this, it could be so much better at every turn. And so really, at that point for decades, I'd been thinking about this. Really is an abstract dream that would never amount to reality. But then these stars are aligning where it's like, no, this is, we still got newspapers, but they're not local. And you're seeing what's happening with them really withering and dying on the vine despite their ongoing publication. But they were quickly turning into ghost newspapers that had no real impact at the local level. And so I saw that as an opportunity. Our initial effort was to buy back these 2 historic papers in Morgan County, one of them going back to the 1880s, another going back to the early 1900s. And so these historic papers that had been here forever, wanted to get them back into local hands. Prior to Schur's ownership, there had been local ownership, and they had been sold in 1999. And so it had been nearly a quarter of a century since we had had locally owned newspaper. And so, I wanted to revive that dream and make it happen. And so our initial efforts, I made the rounds, the chamber, anybody who had listened to me, I went to talk to them and said, here's our dream, here's what we're wanting to do, buy these papers back and return our local newspapers into local ownership, into local hands. And of course, universal support. There was a few who were like, oh, newspaper, they're dead. No, we'll fight that trend too. And so I was talking to the chambers, councils, all the political parties. Again, anybody who would have me come in as a guest speaker, I will go and speak and tell them about this. And so ultimately we gathered about 12 investors, because that was another thing. There was 2 of us that were really sort of spearheading the efforts. But we wanted these to be not just me, a silent partner in a bank loan. We wanted this to be community newspapers, and that includes even symbolically at the ownership level. And so we wanted to get an ownership group of local folks who would be investors. And of course, they have their sphere too, right? But we wanted folks who would be having that buy-in, and anybody who picked it up would know one of them, right? And so, I have a connection.
Yeah, why is it important to have local owners as well?
I think when you have local owners, I mean,
not just like one local owner, but like a group of local owners.
So we wanted it to be, we didn't want it just to be lip service. This is your newspaper community. This is yours. But like, let's say, for example, two of the folks that we have, one of them is an attorney. One of them is a retired sergeant major from the Indiana National Guard. They live, it's not even a one-horse town, but it's a town. We love Eminence, but they're from Eminence, out there in the cornfields. Everybody knows them. They have been there forever. And so we have those folks. So we really did want it to almost be this figurative community-owned newspaper. So again, I may not be an owner, but I know one. Like I have a connection with one of these 9 owners. And so it would sort of add to that notion of the community newspaper, that these are your paper, because one of your friends, one of your families is a member of the ownership group, right? And so that was important, that we had a cross-section of folks who had part of the literal buy-in.
So they pulled together an offer. A year after Stephen left his job at Gannett, his group of buyers told the company that they wanted to buy the 2 Morgan County papers. And, maybe surprisingly, the guy they talked to said yes. Gannett was willing to sell.
And so we are dancing on the ceiling like, hey, we're going to get to the negotiating table. We'll find it. Where there's a will, there's a way. We will make this happen. And we're on the verge, people. Let's go.
And then,
less than a month later, he was let go in a corporate restructure.
And the deal was gone. The next guy they talked to said, nope, we're not going to sell. Another year goes by. It's April 2023. They've been checking in with Gannett. Gannett's not changing its mind. And they realize it's time to start their own paper. It's time for a break. When we come back, how to start a local print newspaper from scratch. Hint, it helps to show up at the county fair. Stay with us. So, Stephen Crane and his group of investors have decided they want to own a local newspaper, but they can't buy the ones that already exist. So they realize it's time for Plan B.
What are we going to do? We're going to start our own newspaper. And with that, we again went back to the original 12 that we had as investors and said, here's the new plan. If you don't want any part of it, thank you for your support. We don't begrudge you at all. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we retained 7, 8 of those original 12. So some people did, and that's totally fine. Not a big deal at all. This is a very different thing because you're starting fresh. You're building a brand from the ground up. And so of those 7 or 8, we got together in May, I believe. Maybe it was early June. And we added another one who heard about it and jumped on board late. And we got together, I think it was early June, because we had the fair that was coming up in July. And early June, it was like, all right, everybody want to do this? I make a motion. Let's start a newspaper, right? Now what are we going to call it? And so this was all like scramble mode. When you have a looming deadline, which was really the fair, we wanted to be at the fair because that's where everybody, I mean, that is the one-stop shop for everybody in the county. They're coming in. That is the one annual attraction that's bringing them in from all corners. And so we wanted to be there. We wanted to do a soft debut, let folks know who we were, what we were trying to do, which is start a brand new print newspaper.
Wait, that's in July?
July of 2023. Okay. Yeah. And so even that first meeting in June, I in fact prepared like 3 pages of possible names for like, and so I'm like, everybody just go mull it over, ponder what is going to be. And they're like, why? Who likes this? Okay, that's what we are. So I'm like overthinking. It's like, oh, this is going to be, it's all identity. Who are we going to be? And they're just like, let's do this. And it's like, okay, let us do this, apparently. And so then it was scramble mode. We got our name, and then you start getting your marketing materials, and you just start making it up as you go, right? Because I've traditionally been a news guy. I know how to put a paper together and get it out the door. Yeah. I know nothing of production. I know nothing of circulation. I know nothing of advertising. Newspaper production is very multifaceted, and everybody outside looking in thinks it sort of magically materializes, but there's many, many moving parts, and I knew nothing of any of them except one. And so it was sort of learning on the fly, sort of building the airplane as we fly it. And so we did. We scramble moded all of our marketing materials for the county fair. That was, I think, like sort of late-ish July. We secured this space August 1st, and then our first edition, August 29th.
Tell me about the county fair. So you went there hoping for what, and what did you end up with?
So we went there hoping for some early subscribers, some early bird subscribers. We called them. And we also were looking for contributors. And so sort of we had two signups, like, hey, do you want to write? Hey, do you want to read it? Write or read or both. We'll take it all. And so we had these signups, but also, of course, our marketing materials. And of course, it's like the old pens and notepads by nature of...
With Morgan County correspondent written on it.
Right, of course.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah, and so we had all of those available and just letting folks know who we were. At this point, because I'd already made the rounds about buying the papers back, people knew who I was, and they certainly knew my previous tenure as editor.
Sure.
So I had that groundwork in place. And so for many of them, it was not a surprising turn of events other than starting our own. But they knew, like, hey, he ran the paper already. They tried to buy it back, did not work. So they're starting their own. Okay, sign me up. And so by the time we left the fair, I think we had just about 500 early bird signups.
And what had you been hoping for?
Really going in without expectation. This whole thing is a leap of faith.
Okay.
Our contention certainly was not just that there's a need for local news. There is no question a need for local news, but is there a desire? That question was answered before the first edition even came out. You had 500 signups. And of course, the old industry ratio, every subscription equals, and I've heard from 2.5 to 4.5 people or whatever, so we'll say 3.5 people. So at 500 signups, 3.5 people, that's darn near 2,000 people who are getting ready to read your first edition. And so we felt good about that. Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. And so that's sort of confirming our speculation, confirming our gamble, like we think there's a desire for local news.
Another question about the people signing up. I'm curious, like, who it was in the community. I mean, this is a print paper, makes me think like generally maybe an older, more established demographic. But I would like to think and hope that there would be a range of ages and so on.
Our general demographic that we have in mind when we're putting this together week in, week out, even going back to before our first edition, was really 40 and up. I know going back to journalism school, we need to get the millennials, we need to get whatever. It's like, why? Because typically, I mean, I don't know about you, but in my 20s, I could not care less about what was going on in my community from a civic standpoint. I was worried about where I was going to meet my friends at the bar that night or whatever. But you see the shift typically happen when folks reach an age where they're getting married, maybe having kids that's starting in the school. Oh, I need to pay attention to what the school board's doing. Oh, I should probably pay attention to what the city council's doing too. And then suddenly you're getting re-engaged civically. And so that was really, we don't want to spend time chasing our tail to try and capture the young folks when really 40 and up is probably going to be our heart and soul of it. And so that really was our aim in terms of what we were putting together. Now, anybody younger, happy to have you aboard, for sure. Yeah, of course.
Along with their focus on older readers is their emphasis on print. That's not just nostalgia. Stephen points to scientific studies that show the superiority of reading print.
It really shows. Retention, your information base is much broader. The overall experience is far better relative to, it's almost like the passive self-guided tour when you're opening up a newspaper. It's that multisensory experience, but also at your own pace, your own flow. It's a much calmer experience compared to the more active, a bit angsty experience of a digital consumption. And so you're getting ads out of the way. And of course, they're telling you what you need to read next. And so You're still, of course, gaining information, but the experiences themselves, night and day contrast between the two, and print wins every time. And so we sort of put our eggs in that basket, right? Print is not dead, despite the common refrain that we're hearing. And in fact, ironically, of course, who was the first to sound that alarm was the publishers of newspapers, who were fat cats who got used to 30% profit margins. Suddenly, as those are getting eroded, oh no, we're at 20%, heaven forbid, when most companies would be happy to have any double-digit profit margin. And so they're sounding the alarm, oh no, we need to scramble and figure out a new model. And so that's sort of what we've seen transpire the last 20 years as folks are trying to figure out what's going to work. Digital age, I get it. But it's a bit similar when e-readers came on and, oh no, all the bookstores are going to go away, the libraries are going to go away. And no question, temporarily you see the pendulum swing, but very quickly as people are realizing, wait, not so fast. The pendulum comes back. Certainly when it comes to newspapers, will the pendulum ever return to the golden age? No. But no question, I think the pendulum is starting to swing back.
And in case you've forgotten what it's like to read a print newspaper, we're going to do an audio tour of the first few pages. Just as a heads up, listening to a tour of a newspaper on a podcast is not the same as actually paging through one yourself. I'm just saying. You've been warned.
Of course, our A1, and this is terrible, this was international headlines over the last week, and it happened to be a local gal who is a senior in high school. So our main headline, tragedy averted. We had an 18-year-old high school senior locally who made online threats to shoot up her high school. So that was our main all the way across. Any other week, Gray Brothers Cafeteria leaving Mooresville, huge. That would be no-brainer main story. But we also had another huge story out of Monrovia. Multi-billion-dollar data center from a company yet unnamed who wants to buy 400 acres in this rolling bucolic section of Morgan County, up off of I-70. Their proposed site literally abuts the town of Monrovia. And so Monrovia was not a part of anything until sort of the very last second. And so they all felt very blindsided by this whole proposal, which would really change the landscape forevermore of an otherwise very rural town in northwestern Morgan County. I weighed in on it on the opinion page.
Okay.
We put our list of government meetings so folks know what's happening there. Everybody was booked into jail over the last week. Everybody was convicted in the 3 superior courtrooms over the last week. Marriages, divorces, all of these little almost public record gossip tidbits, but it's all public record. But, who got divorced this week? I knew they were on the rocks, right? And so this is all, it's your heart and soul stuff of what is community. And so, it gives you talking points and feeds some of the coffee talk conversations.
That combination, I feel like, of the volunteer opportunities, which gives you a sense of what you can do in the community and what's going on, what your options are. And the marriages and divorces, which, it's really literally just names and places, right?
Right.
But as you were saying, it's a way for people to actually know what's going on with the people they may or may not know.
Right.
But that they might know, presumably. If they don't know them, it's probably not so interesting.
I know one of them, and in fact, one of the gals getting married is the niece of one of my best friends. Huh. So I call him out like, what's up with your niece, dude? Even for me, right? Because these are all the networks that we all have in place already. Family, friends, take your pick. Right. And so this really is the catch-all, and very much rubber meets the road stuff. Yeah. Marriages, divorces, court news, convictions, jail bookings. Like this is all like public record, hard news / gossip. But we also get from the sheriff's office every week who's wanted. We want to make sure they already have a prior conviction. I know there's a lot of talk out there in the industry. Mugshots, da. We're fine with it.
Okay, so can you just describe that in a little bit more visually?
So going back to when I was managing editor of the other newspapers, we would do what was called Turn 'em in Tuesday. And so very much this very thing. We used to give a much more general description of who they were, but these are really folks who have been convicted of crimes and they are not responding to some of their legal obligations. So they're really on the run is what it comes down to. They either didn't make a court appearance, and so there is a warrant out for their arrest. And so the Morgan County Jail sends this to me every week about who sort of that week's quote-unquote most wanted is. We call them Turn 'em In Thursday.
And visually, it's on A3. It's the top right corner. There's a sort of a rectangle, and it says "Turn 'em In Thursday" on the very top, and then it's got a wanted, like a stamp on the left. Sheriff's symbol looks like Sheriff's Department, Sheriff's County symbol on the top right, and then a picture of these three mugshots of these three guys who all look like they're having a pretty rough time. And it's very visually captivating. I feel like it's what would be clickbait in the paper if it was clickable.
Right. And in fact, the success rate for this in terms of them actually getting these guys and gals and getting them in and getting them right with the law is over 70%. Wow. In terms of them. But guess what? I guarantee there are friends or family of these three individuals here is like, get your butt down to the jail and make this right, you know?
So it's a traditional community-oriented newspaper. But here's a question. Is that what people want? I've talked to people in Martinsville, people in the age range and demographic that Stephen sees as his primary audience, people who say they don't subscribe and don't know anyone who does, or people who do subscribe but only because they believe in the idea, not because they actually read it regularly. To be honest, I can imagine that might be me too. Still, Stephen is bullish about the business side of things. They did make a profit a lot sooner than they expected.
Our first month that we were in the black was like $70. And we're like, yeah, we did it. We're living it. We've had a couple thousand. And so, it's all moving in the right direction, and we're ahead of the forecast, and we're really ahead of the game. And so that really is, again, fulfilling that, it's not just a dream, but like we're doing it, and self-sustaining, that's a thing, right? I know nonprofit, that's the big model that people are pursuing out there, but we wanted to just do a traditional because that has its own challenges, right, as a nonprofit.
Will the profit continue? Will they be able to bring on more reporters, turn it into a daily? It's too soon to tell. In the meantime, he's doing what he can to keep the community informed about itself. Have you seen any changes in the community as a result?
In terms of, certainly.
There's both the sense of there's certainly the watchdog aspect, but there's also the fabric of the community. And as we've been talking about, that's what local journalism, what a local paper provides, is a sense of community identity by being able to see, this sports event was something that was important enough. It was important to me because my kid was there, but also it was important that the paper decided to cover it. And that makes it feel even more important to me, and so on.
Right. And so you are elevating, you're giving some prominence to all these little, it's salt to the earth people who are out there doing it, right? And that's even why we now have the volunteer opportunities, right? Because you want to give people the opportunity to help and know where to help. We've gotten feedback even on the calendar of events where I have people tripping over themselves to get onto that calendar. Why? Because unless you follow 101 different Facebook pages, you're not going to know what's going on in a collective sense. Mm-hmm. And so even getting that one-stop place for here's what's going on this weekend, take your pick of what you might want to do. We have had people, again, grateful, they will hear from people I saw it in the paper. That's why I'm here, because I saw it in the paper, right? Even something simple that they saw in the calendar of events, it's all of 3 lines. But letting them know that it's out there. In fact, they had some recent safety training or something, and they wanted as many people as they could. And they did a post-training survey, how'd you hear about us? And the newspaper was a common answer. And it's that's why you're doing it. And the government watchdog, you want to know if you want your taxes to go up with this proposed fire territory. That's a different thing. And that too is part of it. But it's the little stuff. It's sort of meat and potatoes-y stuff that is really day in, day out the community happenings above and beyond the governmental nonsense that they continue to do. And so it really is, I mean, yeah, the seed swap by the master gardeners, yes, please, yeah, because spring's here and people want to get out of their house and go and feel like it's right around the corner or whatever. Yeah. All that little stuff, that really is, again, because no question the community fabric is under threat. No question it's not just newspaper, but I think we're combating a general disengagement from the world around us as we go here and just like, so you're contending with the virtual versus the real. And I think whether it's just busy schedules or distractions, take your pick, that disengagement from the world around us is a dangerous, dangerous trend. And the need to combat that is very real. And I think what we do really is pushing back against that larger cultural trend.
As I get ready to go to press with this podcast, the headline in the most recent edition of the Morgan County Correspondent reads, "Out with the Old. Trees removed from around the county courthouse in anticipation of work to be done." If you look around the country, you can see how fractured we are, how little trust we have in the media or each other, how much work there is to be done. The world is changing, and maybe you do have to cut some trees to make an omelet. But if you decide to throw out the bathwater, you might also lose the oldest baby in the books. The newspaper, which is also the community. I'm just going to let you think about that for a second. Maybe you can parse it. I'm not sure I was able to. All right, that's our show. If you want to learn more about the effects of private equity and corporate consolidation on local news, check out Paper Cuts, a report from WFIU News. We've got your quick moment of slow radio coming up, but first, the credits. Interstates is produced and edited by me, Alex Chambers. Our associate producer is Dom Hayab. Our master of social media is Jillian Blackburn. We get support from Eobon Binder, Luann Johnson, Sam Schemenauer, Peyton Whaley, Lisa Robin Young, and Kate Young. Our executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Our theme song is by Amy Olsner and Justin Vollmer, and we have additional music from the artists at Universal Production Music. All right, time for that found sound. That was mallard ducks at Beacon Hill Park in Victoria, British Columbia, recorded by Kate Young. Thanks, Kate. Until next week, I'm Alex Chambers. Thanks as always for listening.